So what is it? Too much here on the slide to go into. What you talked about, or what I mentioned already for quality management, there's environmental management. Everything that lots of organizations do, they already have some sort of framework and structure in place. They're managing inventory, they're managing health and safety, what have you. A lot of organizations haven't taken that next step to doing it for energy. And I didn't talk too much about my background, and this is where I'll go into it, and this is why I got interested in this whole topic at all. I worked for the last 15 years for a big consulting firm, and generally working with a lot of large manufacturers, particularly in the automotive industry. And they would have some great ideas, and of course they're huge users of energy. Assembly plants, paint shops especially, huge, I mean it's a main expense for them. And they would always have these improvement projects going on, but it would be these one-off, big deal, let's figure out the return on investment, can we justify this, can we take it up to the board, get approval, run it all through, great. Everybody cuts a ribbon, spend a year or two doing all this, and we've made all these great savings. And then we move on to the next thing. But that was all it ever was. It was one idea after another, after another. Maybe if you had personnel turnover, you didn't necessarily keep up the momentum of why you were doing this various sort of thing. And so the idea behind all of these sorts of systems is to put a framework in place where you're continually improving, where you're, and we're going to touch on this a little earlier, we're using the plan, do, check, act framework of taking a look at this overall issue, making sure you evaluate it properly, institute whatever criteria you have in terms of making an improvement, and continually improve and work on it. And the key point, and I'll touch on this a little bit, is getting management buy-in from the beginning that this is an important thing for your organization to do. The great thing about the standard, if you want to talk about it that way, and there's only a few of you familiar with the ISO 50001 standard in the room. How many of you have actually read the standard? Just John Paul. And, oh, thank you.
You don't have to say anything.
All right. No, because here's the thing. It might have been a while since you've done it.
Yeah.
It's not long. You could read it in the time we're going to spend here together. And while it sets up this framework, and from what I understand in talking to one of the auditors, within the standard there are 147 different places where it says shall. And for an auditor that's a big deal, meaning this is what a company must do in order to get certified. But the standard pretty much says, okay, you need to do this, you need to put this process in place, but it doesn't necessarily tell you how or exactly what it is you're doing. And so that's the body of knowledge that in some ways is somewhat lacking. You have a standard, it's pretty vague, you need to put together a team, it talks about these various things here that you need to do, again, putting in that continuous framework, but it leaves it a lot up to you. And so over the years, part of what the Department of Energy has done in conjunction with a lot of the groups that have worked on the standard and put together the auditing of the certifications is codify a lot of that. Well, okay, the standard says this, but it only has like a sentence on you should put together an energy team like this. Well then, let's create a worksheet. Let's create an example for what you should do. And over the past several years, I mean, that's what has happened. And all that information we've put in place, we've had it available on an energy.gov website, but as I was telling some of the folks here when we were out on our fire alarm, it's a government website. It hasn't been anything anybody's really wanted to go look at. And it's pretty much just been, here's a bunch of information. Try to read through it. You got to be really highly motivated if you want to do it and figure it out on your own. And we weren't ultimately helping everybody a lot. So ultimately, that's what 50001 Ready is about, and I'll get into that in a second. Certification, of course. You have a standard, you don't have to get certified. Certification is going to cost you money. Depending on what your clients are doing, if there's no tangible market benefit to them, then why would they go ahead and do it? Other than we have a program where we've seen particular companies that want that additional level of verification, want that seal of approval or the proof that their math is right or that these savings are in fact conclusive and exist. And there are reasons for it, but there are plenty of reasons not. And so at the Department of Energy, we're trying to encourage folks who you may want to take that next step. You're moving beyond one-off projects. You don't want to get certified, but you want to do something that you know the structure works. And so that's a lot of what we're trying to do. Comparing it to 9001 and 14001, these things take time to build up some momentum in the marketplace. We've had a lot of good success in recent years. ISO 50001, John Paul can correct me here, because he says he started this all with an email back in 2000.
No, it's actually 97.
97. So blame him for being here. But as it turns out, so the standard itself came in place in 2011, and we're in the process, I think, now of updating it for 2017. So you see a lot of these adoption curves for very similar things. They end up getting some traction when there's a market driver in place. And a lot of what's happened, whether it's quality or environmental management, is generally you have a large company or maybe a municipality that will require something. I know in the case of what you guys do, there's various building codes that you have to work for in certain municipalities that are mandate certain things. We talked about LEED being mandated in Washington, D.C., where I'm from. To date, there's nothing like that for ISO 50001, so it's completely voluntary. There are some incentives in other parts of the world where if you do this, then essentially you've proven out the fact that you're managing energy better than you might be otherwise, and so there are tax incentives. As you can imagine, we're not necessarily expecting anything like that here. So we're working with a lot of big companies that maybe down the road, as they start to see the benefits of this, they'll start working with their supply chains and figure it out that they might want to encourage that. But again, we're still in early days. We're waiting to see ultimately what the ramp up is going to be. And I think I had there in blue there the idea of around 9,000 facilities by 2025. I mean, we'll see. There was a meeting last summer between the Secretaries of Energy for all of like the 20 largest nations, where they have a group together to encourage what they're calling the drive to 50,001. Maybe you've heard it. If you have any interest, it's just a drive to 50,001.org, where they're encouraging 50,001 certified facilities by 2020. Again, we'll see if that goal goes anywhere. What we're doing at the DOE is just a small part of what we're trying to encourage to do that. So why would you want to do it beyond what I talked about? Here's the basic framework of everything. I know it's going to be pretty hard for those of you in the back to see much of this. The main steps are in the graphic there in the upper right in terms of the big thing. For anybody who is already familiar with 9001 and 14001, a lot of this will look really familiar. And so we find for companies that have already done that they have those processes and procedures in place where they have training manuals and they have maintenance manuals and they've interacted with purchasing to encourage purchasing to be involved in that sort of thing. This is a fairly simple add-on to take a look at the energy review portion of the activity. There's one change. I don't know that I talk about it here too much. Okay, it's underlined there in the bottom, is that you can institute a lot of these processes and procedure frameworks for quality or environmental management. You can get certified. And all the certification does is essentially say, you've done this. You've put together the team, you're working it, you're continuously improving, you've got the process in place, you've documented them, you've been audited, good for you. There's no, in those instances, thing where you have to prove, okay, well, my quality is better now than it used to be. Or my environmental performance is better now than it used to be. That's not part of the certification framework. For ISO 50001, it actually is. You do, to be certified to ISO 50001, have to prove in some way. And again, the standard is vague, so it can really be up to you in your own specific circumstances that you have in fact made an energy performance improvement over time. So just one key distinction for any of you who've been somewhat familiar with other standards, that is one thing that's a little different about 50001. We finesse that a little bit in terms of 50001 ready and what 50001 ready from a DOE standpoint and recognition means, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. From the list here of who's already using this, you can see it's mostly manufacturing companies. And again, that's part of the reason that I wanted to be here with all of you, to get a sense of commercial, residential, institutional. What are the barriers that are keeping them from instituting a more comprehensive energy management system framework. That said, had a lot of recent success with hotels, particularly Hilton and Marriott. I'm pleased for that. About the only office building, folks, if you think here, is the quote there from Aflac. They have a lot of office buildings, I think, up in their New York campus that they've actually certified to ISO 50001. And the point that they've made, and we haven't touched on this much yet today, is the idea between our work with DOE and EPA and Energy Star and Energy Star scores, and I'm sure a lot of your clients are interested in that. We look at what we're doing as something that can help make your Energy Star scores better. Just by doing this, over time, you're going to improve, and that's exactly what Aflac has seen. And so we hope that the applicability on the commercial side is a little broader than it has been in the past. Let's really get down to math, and I won't dive too much into this. This is part of why, again, I wanted to talk with all of you and get some exposure to different parts of the potential client base. We got two companies here. The green and the blue lines are for Schneider Electric, and the orange and yellow lines are for 3M, and they're already companies that have a very strong energy management culture. And they took a look over time and said, all right, we've got some of our facilities, we've gone and done the certifications, other ones we haven't. But they all still have energy managers, they're all still working through a lot of the process, but some of them haven't formalized it. How are they doing compared to each other? And you can see, year on year, the top line is always the ones that have gone through the certification, have the processes in place, and they're seeing that it's not just something where you're finding all the low-hanging fruit. You're making a lot of improvement in the first couple of years. It's continuing on year after year after year. I was really surprised. I had a conversation a couple weeks ago with the very first automotive manufacturer that got certified this. In fact, they were so excited about it, they were working with the draft standard back in 2010. Okay, great, good for you. Again, they'd already done 9001, 14001. It was just seen as something to further integrate and add on fairly easily. And so I asked him, it's like, well, you're 5 years in now. In fact, next week, it'll be 5 years exactly since they first got certified. Are you still finding a whole bunch of improvements? It would seem to me that you're not. You would have done everything. He's like, no, we're finding more projects than we ever have because what we've done is we've changed the culture. Everybody is paying attention to this. One thing I wanted to mention when I talked about hotels, and actually you guys might know this a lot more than I do, I noticed, I assume most of you are staying here in the Omni as well, and I know they're not certified, I'm not picking on the Omni, but I saw something on my thermostat in the room, which I haven't normally seen, and maybe I just say at a lot of cheaper hotels. High, low, auto, and economy. And that was fairly new to me, so good for them. But I mean, somebody ultimately had thought through this, and again, I'm sure energy is a big part of their bottom line. So again, it's the idea that we're looking continuously at all the places and not just settling for one-off projects. And Schneider and 3M have been great in working with us over the years and helping share their data, and we're looking ultimately to take that outside of the manufacturing industrial framework. We've seen, and also in talking to a lot of utilities that have done energy management programs with their clients, 5 to 7% improvement first year, and these are all low cost or no cost improvements. And over the course of a few years, 30% is not uncommon. Now, a lot of industries, that's not going to be feasible. So that's part of, again, what I want to understand in terms of if we broaden this to commercial and beyond industrial, that's going to be the case. Talked about a lot of this. We've had some good success, again, in the manufacturing standpoint. Let me not dwell too much on this. Touched on all this. Again, this information is in the slides for you. I understand you can download it from the app. I don't know why you'd want to try to read this on your phone, but please, when you go back and look at the slide deck overall, then you can see it. But what I'm mostly here to talk about, and what I may have time, let me just check here, to demo for all of you, is our 50001 Ready program and the tools behind it. So why did you come up with 50001 Ready? And I mentioned the fact that there's no real market driver out there for people wanting to get ISO 50001 certification, certainly not in the United States. You've got to want to do it. You've got to already be best in class. You've got to realize that, okay, this is a framework that's going to help us. And then you've got to get buy-in from all parts of your organization. And that's hard. You're going to try to work across purchasing and training and what have you. In every facility, I mean, you're really going to have to be committed to it. So the idea was we're going to take all that information, all that learning, all of that few years of, well, here's how you really do it. Here's what worksheets you'd want to have. Here's what other tools and spreadsheets are useful to you. And distill it into something that's a little easier to use. Now, we got big goals. I mean, we're the federal government. We got to have a line with what have you. But the key point is that last bullet under objectives. We're not trying to be another new program. We're not trying to be another thing you got to do. The first thing I did when I got this job last year was I asked my boss, so we're creating this program, this recognition. Why would anybody care? Why are they going to do this instead of LEED? Why are they going to do this instead of Green Globes? Other ISO certifications? I mean, what's the point? Energy Star scores, all of that. And the point is, no, we don't want any one more program. People are going to check the box and say, do this. The point is, if you're doing this, if you're already in a place where your organization, or I guess in your case, your clients' organizations, are wanting to move beyond those one-off energy improvement projects and do something a little more systematic. If they're already there, then let's help them get there, especially if the barrier is, oh, we don't want to pay to get certified. There's no point to being certified. Okay, great. But you already want to do the work. Let us help you do it in a way that we can recognize you. We can say, hey, you've done this to our satisfaction. And if you want to get certified, great. And if you don't, then that's fine too. Keep working the system, keep improving, and hopefully the DOE will have the tools to help you and the recognition to help you. So I touched a little bit there on the bottom. What is 50,001 ready? So if you want to be called 50,001 ready by the DOE, oh, and I forgot to say, so you guys are a little bit of a sneak peek of my audience. In fact, you're the first audience I've talked to en masse about this in months, other than we've been working with a lot of beta testers on all of this. The program itself is going to be announced next month. So when I show you some URLs up here, some of them work, some of them don't. They will in a couple of weeks, and government shutdown willing, and we'll take it from there. So.
Are you going to be stuck here in Central Florida if there's a shutdown?
John asked me if I'm going to be stuck here in Central Florida if there's a shutdown. And the answer is no, because I'm going home tomorrow. But I have another conference to go to next week to talk about this, and that may or may not happen. So enough commentary about that. 3 main steps. So the idea behind all of this is we want something you can self-declare. You don't need to be audited. And, well, okay, great. Anybody could self-declare. Well, fine. Well, we definitely want to step you through the process. So what have we done? Talk there in step 1 about the 50,001 Ready Navigator. And if we have time, that's what I'm going to show you a little bit here. Also willing that the fire alarm didn't knock out my internet connection. I don't know that just yet. 147 shalls in the standard. Well, how do we make sense of that? What does that really mean? We've boiled it down to 25 tasks in 4 areas, what I call planning, energy review, continual improvement, and system management. And you don't need to remember all this as you go look at the tool itself. It's all in there. It's very easy. Don't worry about that. Second thing we want to do, though, again, I mentioned the standard requires that you have to demonstrate an energy performance improvement. But, again, it's very vague. All the standard says is you, for your facility, have to come up with appropriate energy performance indicators, criteria, as well as what's an appropriate baseline, and then measure your baseline period against a reporting period, show you've made an improvement, and you're good to go. So I've talked to the auditors, like, well, what does that all really mean? And they start getting very esoteric, and they talk about, well, you can measure it like this, and you can measure it like that. I'm fine. So we already have some calculators that the DOE has put together that allow you to do that. So if you have a facility. You've already got an Energy Star score. Obviously, your energy is going to fluctuate with occupancy and plenty of other factors. On the industrial side, there's a lot more depending on production. Well, we actually have some regression-based models that allow you to enter all of that information in and then puts out a number of, okay, perfect world, apples to apples, how is my energy in 2016 versus 2015? To get 50001 certified, you would have to show that you've improved. For 50001 ready, we're understanding that, okay, you might just be starting the process. You may just be going through identifying those opportunities and starting to improve. So to be initially recognized as 50001 ready, the Department of Energy is not requiring that part where you've made an improvement. We are requiring going forward, like a year later, if you want to keep being recertified or re-recognized in our case, that from that point on, yes, you'll have to be showing that you've made these improvements and that your energy performance is getting better. But to start, well, we have tools. We also are making it so that you can use a utilities energy management program if they have it. If you've already got information in Energy Star, not just the score, but for those who've worked in Energy Star's Portfolio Manager, you can put enough information there where you can compare your performance from a baseline to a reporting period. So there's some special reports that we're making sure work so that you can carry that over. Step 2, ultimately, is showing some sort of energy performance calculation, analysis, at least to start, to say, okay, you're doing the math, you're doing the work, and then going forward, of course, we would logically expect that you're going to improve. Third thing, easiest thing there is. In the tool I talked about, you go through all 25 tasks, you've clicked, you've completed them all. We only going to require 2 things. First one is a form that 2 people have signed, and these people are specifically defined in the ISO 50001 standard. There's an energy team manager, if you will, and there's also an executive that's responsible. It's the management representative is the way the terminology is. We're going to require those 2 people to sign this form and say, yeah, we told the truth. Because within the tool, we're not asking for any data, any information. That is for the organization to keep for themselves. This is one of the first things that happened when I came on board last year was we had a lot of these conversations about, well, why does the government want all this data? It's like, we figured out we don't really need or want the data. We just ultimately want the calculation at the very end that shows how have you changed, how have you improved. And there's a lot of sensitivity around the government having this information, or even just that it's competitive information. And it could be something that could be ultimately learned through a Freedom of Information Act request. Specifically, I'm thinking of a data center where this is a competitive differentiator. So we're not gathering that data. We're going to provide worksheets and templates and all that, and the organizations keep all of that on their own hard drives. At the end, all you do is upload that form we've signed and said, yes, we've actually did this. And then the other thing, which is the printout, which just says, here's our change, our 5%, our 6%, whatever. For this facility over time. So I know that comes up a lot, so I want to address that issue right off the bat. And then, towards the right, step 4, if you want to go above and beyond and get certified, great. There are a lot of companies out there that will audit you and help you do that. And what we already have, and if I have time later on I'll touch on it, is an existing program in the Department of Energy called Superior Energy Performance. And that certification goes even above and beyond ISO 50001. It's a third-party validation of all of the calculations. It's not only a top-down regression improvement calculation, but a bottom-up calculation of looking at all of the improvement projects and how they contributed. And that's what we've had in place for several years. And I'll show you later on a list of the companies that have done that, and the data we've gathered from that is amazing, but it's not a lot of companies. It's really a best-in-class, really want to be motivated to do it. The whole idea behind this is let's bring energy management system implementation to a much wider audience. So that's what 50001 Ready is. Self-attest, put it in place, work at your own pace, don't have to get audited or certified if you don't ever want to.
Was this an annual
The question is it an annual thing? You fill out paperwork and all that? And ultimately, yes. Our recognition for being 50001 ready starts out with, I guess, an expiration date of a year. If you've gone ahead and done it and you've put the system in place, because it generally takes an organization between 6 and 18 months to do all this, depending on where they're already at in terms of having an energy team, an energy plan, having evaluated all their significant energy uses, doing audits and management reviews and the like. So the idea is if you've done all of that and you've self-attested to doing it, then yes, you're 50001 ready, according to the Department of Energy, for that year. Should you then a year later want to keep it, we'll notify you, probably through the tool. We haven't quite figured out the mechanism for that. And say, okay, yeah, what will we require? And for the first year on, it's going to be pretty simple. If you actually implement an energy management system, you're going to be doing all these things. So when I show you the 25 tasks here in a bit, it'll be nothing to go through and say, yeah, we're still doing all that. The only thing would be to rerun a calculation from the energy performance standpoint. You would have created a baseline initially. You would have had a reporting period initially. From that point, a year later, you'll now have another year's worth of data. All of that data is entered however you want to enter it in various spreadsheets offline, and then you can run it through our online calculator. There's no logins, there's no password, it's never saved. It just spits out a number saying, here's your percent change. And so long as in year 2 and beyond, that's a positive number, then yeah, we continue to recognize you as being 50001 ready. Part of the idea behind getting 50001 ready is, all right, well now you're ready to be certified and get audited. And again, I said you can do that if you want or not. I was talking to the auditors, and it's like, okay, well, what would you really look for? What are we missing? What it would be if we're calling you 50001 ready, and to do that, we really want you to be ready. If we're implying that you could get certified, again, it's not certification, but we'd like to think it's close. And so I had long discussions with the auditors. What would you be looking for that they might not have done? And here's just a couple examples. One of the last tasks we have in here is a management review. You will have done everything and you've presented all the findings up to top management, and they would have committed to giving you the resources to go forward and implement the improvement projects going forward. What an auditor would look for is that you've done what they call an entire management review cycle, where you have to set up how frequent is this going to be. Usually it's annually. And you will have had to have gone through all of that. So maybe in this case you're already 50001 ready, you've certified you've done that, but you wouldn't have gone through a whole cycle of, say, a year's worth of quarterly updates. There's another thing called I forget now, but there's other various internal auditing procedures that, again, you would need to go through several times for an auditor to say, yes, you've done this. Whereas we might be calling you 50001 ready ahead of that. So there'll still be essentially a time element to it going forward to be certified. But other than that, we're pretty confident in that if we're saying you're 50001 ready, then you're 95% of the way to certification. And so if that ultimately becomes an interest of yours and a driver somehow from your clients, then you're close enough to do that. Here is my baby, the 50001 Ready Navigator. If I have time, I'm just going to duck out and we'll show it to you for real. Okay, it's 10:42, so I will race through this just to show you briefly where to go. I had the link there, but yay, internet's working. If you go to that URL, and it's in your slide deck, and soon it'll be available on energy.gov/50001ready. That's the website that's not up yet. You go here. There's a lot you can do here without creating an account. So that's the other thing I wanted to make clear to everybody. If you create an account, then you have access to a lot of the team management aspects where you can add team members. They don't have to be in your organization. They can be consultants or what have you. Assign them to tasks. Ultimately write notes within the tool itself back and forth amongst the team. Where are we at in this particular task? But for now, I'm just going to show you right here on the screen. We want to see, let's go here. Okay. Little splash page to tell you what it's all about. Sorry. Main part here is the dashboard. I mentioned the 4 different areas for the 25 tasks are split into. You scroll down a little further. You can see under each one all the various tasks. If you want to go into any one in particular, that's where we've put all of the further information. Getting it done is real brief, task overview, full descriptions, add notes, all of the various templates, worksheets, what have you. And again, I'm not logged in on this particular page. So all of this, anything you want to see about any of the different areas, here's the list of all 25. But if you do log in, it's a lot handier. Here's a lot of my test stuff. You want to see what's going on in my townhouse? Oh, logged me out after all that time. Sorry about that. What? Nope. All right. Well, I knew something was going to fail in doing the live demo. But anyways, I'll be around the conference for another day. For anybody who wants to talk about this more, I can even pull up my laptop and show you what's going on. Glenn's showing me that I got 10 minutes left, so I do want to leave sufficient time for Q&A. Let me get back to the very end of the presentation to let you know where we're going with all of this. A couple more screenshots of the tool itself. Within the tool, you ultimately, and I didn't get to show you this, but if you've completed all the tasks, then of course it takes you to the point where you can then upload those files and submit for our recognition. The calculator I talked about briefly, again online, no passwords, none of that, offline spreadsheets, and we'll give you the number. What it is and what it isn't, we're not trying to recreate the wheel. We're not trying to actually take away any consultant's business about ISO 50001. We're trying to take all of this learning, these several years of people who have implemented ISO 50001 compliance systems, and said, all right, how do you really do it? Standards vague, how does it work? And so within the Navigator tool, I'm sorry I didn't have more time to show it to you, is all the information there to learn at your own pace. We're ultimately going to add a lot of video training modules to that over the course of the summer. So again, if you're interested, even if you want to just adopt pieces of it and not go forward for recognition or certification, then we'd like to think it's a great resource for all of that. Part of the idea behind the calculator also is to getting organizations used to the regression-based modeling of looking at your energy performance improvement. Take into account production changes or test cycles or what have you, and start comparing your energy apples to apples. If you're just looking at your utility bills and you're not taking into effect the, okay, well, we lost that tenant for the last 6 months, and oh, okay, great, so our energy was down. Well, was it really down, or was it down just because of that? So, I mean, we're trying in those ways to help ultimately encourage a little more of this learning about energy management, energy calculations. Last point on there, not requiring certification. That's not our role. Government's never going to tell you, you got to get certified. If there are market drivers out there, you want to get certified to 50001 or whatever else, fantastic. But we're not in that space. We're just here to help out with that. I'm not going to have much time to talk about the rest of what we do. I did mention briefly already superior energy performance. I'll just touch on some of our main companies that already do it. Again, there's the MSC reference I knew I was going to have there for John Paul. Great thing about these, and we've heard this from a lot of these companies who've gone to that next step, that it's really helped them make the case when they got to go back to their board of directors and say why we want to do this. They have clear, concrete, audited proof of we did all these things and they saved us this, and so this is why the next steps are what we should do. Lots of good data. They've been really helpful to that. But that's fine. But we spent several years building these relationships. That's not going to move the needle. That's 50 facilities in the United States. I mean, it's great, but ultimately the idea behind 50001 Ready is if companies are interested in implementing energy management systems and moving beyond project by project improvements, we want it to be hundreds and thousands of companies to do this. And if certification had been a barrier, or even just the fact that learning about certification has been a barrier, then our tools and our recognition program are here to help with that. You have all this in your slides. We've had some great feedback from some of our big companies that have worked on us in the past. We've been working with beta testers for the last several months about this. We're very excited. You're getting my sneak peek. Don't go to that URL yet, the one on the bottom, till at least next week, but probably a couple weeks, and look for an announcement about the program overall, probably around middle of May again.